Hello, and welcome to the second session today of the RAF Museum's virtual conference. It's great. I can see that a few people I know typing in the chat box, and some of you I don't know so well, but know through Twitter. Don't forget to tweet your thoughts on hashtag RAFM conference. James Kitely seems to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting at the moment, so perhaps some of the rest of you would like to add your thoughts today. It's really lovely to see you. For those who don't know me, my name's Sophie Antrobus. I recently completed a PhD and about to start a new job. But what I'm particularly interested in, relevant to this panel, is that I worked on United States Air Force and Royal Air Force engagement after the 2003 Iraq War. And my PhD looked at USAF and RAF engagement in the 1920s, and I completely missed the post-Second World War period. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers on both French and American relations. So I'll get on with it straight away and introduce our first speaker. Loris Paoletti is currently serving as a military historian in the French Air Force at SERPA, which is their Centre for Studies, Outreach and Partnership. And he's completing a PhD at Paris EPHE, which analyses the role of air defence in French diplomacy and strategy during the Cold War. Over to you. Thanks.
Hello, I am Loris Paoletti and I work as a military historian for the French Air Force. I am also working on a PhD which studies the history of the French air defense during Cold War, and that includes political, diplomatical, strategic and military dimensions of this subject. Based on my PhD research, my paper will present how the Royal Air Force's cooperation helped to rebuild France's air defense after 1945. First of all, talking about air defense can mean two different things: the mission of air defense and also an air defense command. About the mission of air defense, it can be defined as all the measures used to suppress or lower the efficiency of a hostile air aggression. This mission can mobilize active means like fighters or AA artillery and passive means like camouflage, and also a coordination of these means by a command and control architecture. Also, air defense can be offensive, for example, to cover Allied bombers over hostile territory, and defensive. In France, this mission is called Défense Aérienne du Territoire and is seen as a matter of national sovereignty. Concerning the Air Defense Command, it is a centralized and unique command dedicated to the air defense mission and that uses all available means, military and civilian. Such a command exists in the UK during World War II with the Fighter Command, whereas France has to wait until January 1945 to create its Commandement de la Défense Aérienne du Territoire. My presentation will cover a period running from 1940 to 1949. From 1940, because in order to understand how the defeat during the Battle of France inspired the foundation of a French Air Defense Command, and 1949, because the foundation of NATO changes the nature of the French and British cooperation in air defense matters. Finally, in terms of geographical patterns, this paper will be focused on the French metropolitan territory, as it is the most vulnerable and threatened part of France at that time. This is an advantage because the aerial threat is supposed to come from the east, first from Germany and then from the USSR and the Warsaw Pact. But it is also a disadvantage because the French territory is reduced and lacks territorial depth, which is a problem if we consider the speed and autonomy of the planes of that time. These problematics lead us to study to what extent France is able to resurrect its air defense, and particularly with the RAF and Great Britain's help. So first of all, to study this subject, this study will begin with a quick look at the military trauma for France, which is the defeat of 1940, and how this battle forged the World War II, the post-World War II Armée de l'Air. The Battle of France in 1940 showed that the French doctrine and organization in terms of air defense was obsolete for modern air operations. France did not possess a unified air defense command, and priority was given to land operations and missions of cooperation. As a result, fighter units were scattered all over the metropolitan territory, sometimes under air command and sometimes under army command, which ended being useless against large German Blitzkrieg units. In addition, French air defense suffered from a significant technical inferiority from fighters to anti-aerial artillery and detection systems. A brief comparison can be made with the British Fighter Command, as the RAF was able to win the Battle of Britain thanks to an air defense system that contrasts with the French model of that time. Indeed, in 1940, the Fighter Command possessed a functional organization with a centralized control and command system. The information coming from its radars that composed the chain home is exploited in order to use a large and modern fleet of fighters. In 1940, after France's armistice, airmen started to cross the Channel in order to join the ranks of British squadrons and the Forces Aériennes Françaises Libres. These pilots and officers fighting for the Fighter Command gathered experience and were able to observe the British model of air defense. Men such as Valin or André Hartemann are two relevant examples and will be serving in French headquarters in 1945 when the country starts rebuilding its air force. After World War II, the French airmen who fought in the coalition led by the British and the US are convinced that modern warfare needs to obtain air superiority before any other action. However, the headquarters of national defense in France that are named État-Major de la Défense Nationale had different priorities at that time, which were air support in order to cover the Rhine, and also long-distance transport planes to restore order in North Africa, Madagascar, and Indochina. But the Armée de l'Air officers produced an interesting amount of studies and lobbying, which allowed the air defense matters to stay a priority for the government of that time. And so in January 1945, General de Gaulle creates a single and unified command on the model of the Fighter Command in Great Britain, which is called the Commandement de la Défense Aérienne du Territoire, also called DAT in French. It is the first time that the French Air Force possesses the means to complete the mission of air defense using every available tools, military and civilian. In 1945, the French civilian and military authorities still hope to rebuild a national army with domestic means only, especially for air defense, which is considered as an expression of the country's sovereignty. However, the context of massive demobilization, destroyed national industry, and growing turmoil in the colonies forces the government to postpone the equipment of this new command. Hence, the French Air Force, based on World War II's return of experience, begins to consider the solution of practicing its air defense mission in coalition. The first and logical reflex is to exploit the tradition of cooperation with the Royal Air Force, with whom contact never stops. The Fressange Commission is sent in France in order to help the DAT to set up its new organization. It is at that time that a radar plan is designed in the northeast of the country in order to prevent a new attack from the east and also to protect Paris, the capital. For the RAF, it is a way to obtain an early air defense system based on the continent and also to lock down the channel. And for material matters, the Hartmann-Dixon Agreement of 1945 provides the delivery of British planes to the French Air Force. And so it's the first time that France obtains its first jets, the Vampires, but also radars and munitions and licenses to manufacture British design engines. And this help will be a gain for the French industry in order to master this kind of new technology. The special relation between France and the UK is reinforced with the Treaty of Dunkirk, signed in 1947. This agreement introduces the idea of mutual defense and thus air defense in Europe. The objective for France is to perpetuate a doctrinal and material assistance, but also to achieve a common air defense that could be efficient against large attacks from the east, maybe from Germany and more eventually from the USSR later on. As Cold War becomes a real threat, this model is extended towards Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands through the Treaty of Brussels of 1948. For France and the UK, it pushes the first curtain of air defense further towards the east, which means that both the Fighter Command and the DAT will have more time to plan and to conduct their defensive missions. Also, this alliance uses British material, which facilitates cooperation between its members. Even though this alliance lacks equipment, it shows the will of Western Europe to organize its defense inside a military and diplomatic coalition, and especially under RAF leadership for air defense matters. This alliance is a way to prepare West European nations to NATO and its collective defense that is based on a repartition of military responsibilities. In 1948, after the adoption of the Vandenberg Resolution, the USA are able to take part to a collective alliance in Europe. It opens the door to the creation of NATO, a military alliance with large prerogatives in terms of air defense. Even though centralization of command by shape can be observed, the fighter command keeps a certain level of autonomy. However, the DAT is quickly modernized thanks to US aid, but the French government will frequently contest the US and NATO's concept of integrated defense. To conclude, the RAF laid the foundations of France's air defense after World War II in terms of organization, doctrine, and also equipment. But it is NATO that truly modernizes the DAT so that it becomes fully effective in the 1960s and with French material too. As an example, 80% of air defense fighters come from national industries at that time. And after this period, the DAT progressively becomes a symbol of de Gaulle's policy of independence, especially when it starts protecting the French nuclear forces from 1964 to nowadays. Thank you for your attention.